Well, hey there.
Hello, hello. Now, the tennis tour may not be back in its entire form, but we thought we may as well come back and have a bit of a chat and see what's going on. So we're going to call this Ace Previews Live. Hopefully you're going to see a lot more media or video content over the latter part of 2020, and hopefully we actually see some genuine tennis being played at some point. I'm Steve, and I'm joined today by my guest, Noops. How are you, good sir?
What's happening? It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's warm and sticky, and it's a beautiful July day here in Philadelphia. We're not quite at 90 degrees and 90% humidity, but we're working our way up to it. So it's good to have air conditioning. How about you?
Yeah, look, I'm in Melbourne, so I'm currently on day 2 of a 42-day lockdown. So yeah, I'm just going to be entertaining myself for the next 6 weeks. Yeah, I've got some toilet paper, I've got some food, and off we go. It's not much else I can really do at the moment. So,
well, any big plans? I know you're studying to become Dr. Ace Previews, so I'm sure there'll be some of that. But anything interesting? You got some books set aside to read or movies to watch?
I haven't got any movies. Some sport has kind of picked up again here, which has been handy. But no, I'm just going to be doing my study in the background, I think. Just try and get ahead of that as much as possible. So when tennis comes back, you can give it a bit more attention. How about you? What have you got coming up over the next little while?
Things are starting to loosen up a little bit over here. Pennsylvania, where I live, the state is doing pretty well. We flattened the curve. It stayed pretty low. The governor here was a little bit ahead of everybody and shutting things down, and has been pretty aggressive not aggressive, I guess slow and aggressive about being safe in terms of letting things open up. I think we went green, if you will, which is the safest color on whatever the scale was last week. And people have actually been pretty responsible. When you go to grocery stores, everyone's wearing masks. When you go inside of little stores and things, everyone's wearing masks. I haven't seen too many eateries open up inside. A few places I've seen people inside, but not too much. There's been outdoor seating, so we're kind of like it's a soft opening, if you will, here. So hopefully we can hold on to that and avoid some of the peaks we've seen in some of the other states.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, what I thought we might do is have a bit of a general chat. I'm just going to pop some little conversation topics up on the screen. For anyone who's tuning in, thanks for tuning in. It has been a little while, so I do apologize if I'm a little bit slow on the buttons or getting to everyone's questions. But if I just bring up onto the screen now, fingers crossed this all works okay. We've just got a couple of little conversations and things we're going to talk about today. If you do have a question, chuck it into the chat on Periscope. Also, this is streaming live on YouTube, and I'm going to be doing some videos over the latter part of the year on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to Ace Previews on there. But I thought what we might get started with is have a bit of a chat, and I'll get you to start, Noops, and who your winners and losers are of the quarantine edition.
Yeah, going back, trying to think of, I'll start with the positive. Maybe what we'll do is we'll go back and forth. That'll be a little more fun. And the first one, early on in quarantine, Christy Ahn did a really good job of keeping us entertained every day with silly little videos. I know the first couple of weeks there was something fun for her. When you think about quarantine and what might define a winner and what might define a loser, I think that she did pretty good. What were you thinking of in terms of a winner? Come on, you gotta have at least one winner.
Do I have to start with a winner, do I?
All right, fine. You can start with the loser if you want. That's okay.
No, actually, look, to be honest, there were probably a number of players through that February-March period who were playing with injuries or slight niggles that probably weren't at their best. Someone who probably comes to mind for me is Angelique Kerber. I think she hurt herself in Adelaide in January, and she was having some hamstring issues, I think it was, and just looked to be struggling a little bit through the early part of the year. And for someone who's so reliant on her game and her movement, I think this break will potentially do her the world of good, and to be able to kind of free things up for her, in terms of coming back to the tour at 100%. So she's probably one that comes out to mind. Did you have any other winners?
Well, You know what the heck? I'll embarrass you early on. I was going to say you. I thought you had a great quarantine. You've been
Yeah.
working really hard, and you wrote a couple pieces that were picked up. I don't know if you want to rehash that or if now is the time to kind of get into some of your feelings and some of those things. But I wanted to congratulate you specifically on behalf of, I'm sure, everybody else that's listening and follows us. I know you get a ton of recognition for the Novak Djokovic open letter. I know the Zverev open letter was very well received as well. To embarrass you even further, I'll let people know, and we won't say specifically because you didn't even tell me, but a couple players, one specifically, even reached out to you and said thank you and kind of let you know what was going on. So congratulations to you. I think that you've had a pretty good quarantine.
I would love tennis to be in a position where I just didn't need to write any more of those letters. To be honest, it was actually quite therapeutic to write them. As someone who has followed the sport very closely from, as long as I can remember, you don't get up and watch, random streams of random tennis matches in all sorts of parts of the world if you don't actually genuinely enjoy the sport. So I think from my perspective, and as someone who's a small business owner, it is quite difficult to see, particularly the last couple of weeks, things have improved a little bit, but just watching those who probably don't need the tour back as much as others just kind of flaunt everything that's been recommended from basically every health kind of body anywhere in the world. So it has been a little bit disappointing in patches, but I think that what we really actually need is just tennis coming back on tennis courts. I think tennis has never needed tennis more than it does right now, and hopefully we can see some quality tennis, but more importantly, tennis that adheres to what the precautions and measures are in those particular areas. I think that's going to be first and foremost, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about when we think that the tour will return and the calendar's a little bit later. But obviously, there's a lot of question marks as we're chatting at the moment as to how things are going to unfold. Before I get into, I guess, some of the losers or those who perhaps haven't had such a great quarantine period, is there anyone for you that stands out?
Well, I wanted to maybe circle back a little bit in the first moment of rustiness in this Periscope to your thought about some of the injury players and maybe hit on that a little bit more. I think that this long break will be really interesting for a lot of sports. I wonder what this does for certain older players. Serena Williams will talk about a lot, I think, when we get to the Grand Slam early thoughts. But when you think about players like that, you mentioned Angelique Kerber. I was flipping through Simona Halep, someone who's had a lot of back injuries lately and was kind of tough at the end of the year. You look at the men's side, what does that do for someone like Roger Federer? Is it actually better long-term for him to maybe take some months off and try to rehab and spend some time getting healthy? Or would it be better for him to play tennis? And, if he doesn't actually have to choose, if he gets to take that time off, do we get a fresher Roger Federer next year? So what do you think about it in terms of maybe not even specific players, but what types of players do you think are really benefiting from this, maybe from having this time off?
It is so variable from player to player. I think obviously that those who have lost out the most out of what's been suggested, I guess, for the tour resumption is anyone whose best surface is grass. Obviously we've lost that entire season, albeit, we can call it a month. It's not really a season. It's that month of tennis where, if your best surface is grass, you will not be able to earn points or ranking points, or more importantly, money for a lot of these players until the middle of next year. I think it's going to present a really interesting balance, and when we talk about, I guess, the players in general, but also looking at kind of odds and betting in terms of some of these Grand Slams that are coming up, we're going to have a very delicate window here of matches coming across multiple continents on multiple surfaces, and you're going to get those players who are perhaps good on both hard court and clay without being fantastic, having to make some tricky decisions, whereas you're probably going to see some other players who have the ability to pick and choose based on the decision made around rankings and ranking points that are going to be able to kind of work to their strengths and try and take a couple of scalps where they perhaps may have underperformed last year in the equivalent tournament. So it's a really tricky time for all the players before you consider what could be thrown up in terms of, you know, potential positive tests and players having to pull out of tournaments, and you know, before all those variables, and then when you add that in, it's just going to be it's going to be messy.
Yeah. So nobody else for me that I want to touch on here. I did see Mason in the chat mention Dominic Thiem. We'll probably touch on him in the next section, Exhibition Watch. But anybody else for you here before we jump forward?
Look, I think I haven't actually seen much of it come up on my feed, and my feed being quite heavily, obviously, tennis dominant. You know, the UTS showdown outside of a couple of videos, I haven't really seen anything. I mean, I don't know if I know Patrick Mouratoglou did say the average age of tennis fans is 61, and perhaps he's using different methods to communicate with, you know, a number of tennis fans. But you know, and I do worry because he did say that tennis fans, the average age will be 71 in a decade. So I'm a little bit worried about Patrick's ability to use stats to be able to, you know, generate these big tournaments. But you know, it's tricky in this day and age to be able to kind of set something up, and then you know, he's with that tournament that was immediately put behind a paywall, and you need to subscribe to kind of get involved. And you know, players have been in and out. There's been, you know, a lot of attention elsewhere, and it's, you know, I don't think that's gone particularly well from my perspective. But you know, who knows in the coming, you know, weeks, months, if they need a hub or somewhere. Well, there's an academy sitting there in France that a couple of people are hitting the tennis ball at the moment.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, quarantine has definitely shown a lot of the cracks and you know, issues in is the tennis organization in general. There's a lot of disconnect, and we'll get to it and probably talk about this a little more when we get to the scheduling, frankly. But just a lot of random stuff flying around. So, like you said, tennis needs tennis more than anything. So we have something to talk about besides all this other stuff.
Definitely. Now we'll jump on to Exhibition Watch. So, you know, exhibitions aren't for everyone. Some people like to just watch just to get a feel for what's going on, because in a lot of these instances you can't, you know, attend a lot of these tournaments that are being run appropriately at the moment. Has anything stood out for you? Have you been watching? You know, I think they're saying was that Dominic Thiem's played across a number of different countries, but I think that's what somebody was at. Evan King played somewhere upwards of 80 matches or something since the quarantine period commenced. Have you been keeping your eye across anything in particular?
Yeah, I've been trying to pay attention to as much as possible, and it was kind of nice. One of my goals for this year is to dip my toe a little more into men's tennis so that we can have more serious conversations about that. And it's been nice to have a chance actually to watch some of these small tournaments. You had the Battle of the Brits, which had some nice British players. We had Dan Evans won the tournament, which is great for him. Andy Murray played, Kyle Edmund played, Cam Norrie played. So just getting familiar with kind of their names, some of their statistics and stuff. That was nice. Looking into, I'm trying to remember what the name of the tournament in the United States was, but had some bets. I'm trying to remember everybody who played. That was the one where Tiafoe ended up having to leave because he had coronavirus, but Opelka played, Isner played. Again, Tiafoe did end up playing a match. Query played a couple other guys. So I've been following that actually and get into some of that. Dominic Thiem's been great. He's running an event right now. What is it? What do they call it? Dominic Thiem 7 or something. And that's been really fun. An event on clay, which is obviously great for him. But it's him. I'm trying to think. Casper Ruud's played there.
Rublev.
That's right. Rublev. Struff. Who else? We should probably be better prepared for that. Gusta Roberto Berrettini's playing. Batusta Agut's been playing, but it's been fun actually to dip my toe a little bit in the men's side and watch that. From the women's perspective, there was a nice tournament in Charleston for about a week. You had a bunch of good players there. Sophia Kennan played. Madison Keys played. Allison Risk played. Bethany Maddox-Sands was one of the captains. I'm trying to think, but you had some nice players there. I got to see some good tennis. Some of the Canadian players have actually been playing. Leila Fernandez has been playing a bunch of these little exhibition events. Jeannie Bouchard seems to be a little more serious about tennis. She's played and actually won a match, which was nice. So the exhibition has been kind of a nice, soft reset for tennis for me. So how about you? I know you've been score watching a little bit. Have you been getting a chance to see any actual play?
Yeah, I've been watching snippets and bits and pieces. I've tried to, you know, I think when things kicked off and things started, I tried to get away from things a little bit, having, you know, not knowing when things were going to resume. in those first couple of weeks. I've watched patches. It's the tricky thing with exhibitions is knowing how the motivation levels compared to what you're going to see when the tour resumes. So it's good to kind of pick up little bits and pieces, but I don't think there's too much to glean at the moment. I think the big positive was, and you mentioned it there, that Battle of the Brit exhibition was run exceptionally well, considering I think the first ball was hit a couple of hours after the Adria Tour positive results were coming out. So, I think they've shown that things can be done in a way that is very safe for the players. I guess my worry, thinking about that transitioning over to, and people talking about the US Open, which we'll get into a bit in a couple of minutes, is what's actually going to happen. We're comparing outcomes from exhibitions run with crowd and various media outlets and things on site to then use that information to be able to decide whether we think the US Open should go ahead, which is not going to have any crowd, that we know media on site, that we know Lions people or very minimal Lions people. It's kind of comparing apples with oranges at the moment. But, I think we're going to start to see more and more exhibitions, and hopefully we can instill and see a little bit of confidence in terms of how these things will run. I think that's going to be a really key thing to be able to get the tour back, and hopefully all those players at the top who are, commanding this attention can use that platform to be able to promote a way to achieve, a tournament or an exhibition that can be run appropriately, and something that we can then replicate moving forward.
Yeah, it is really great to be able to see tennis being played, to be able to see these tournaments executed. You're right; it's probably something I've actually taken for granted, especially considering you've seen some players get sick. Like I mentioned, Tiafoe got sick during an actual tournament, played a match, left, and everything was fine. They finished the event. It'll be interesting to see how that scales, like you said, once we get to even 32-player tournaments, let alone trying to take on the U.S. Open and stuff like that. I think overall these exhibition events are a good opportunity to get familiar with maybe some names you're not used to seeing more often,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it'll be a good opportunity to get a feel for form. I think that a lot of the people, men and women that are playing in some of these events actually have a step ahead of everyone who's not playing, simply because they're keeping that competitive edge. I know that practicing helps a lot, and you can play a lot of those matches, but getting into that rhythm of playing somebody else makes a big difference. And I think that as we start to get into looking at some of those matches that are coming up, I am going to, I think early on, favor the players that have played so far.
Yeah, and I guess something to keep an eye out as well is, if you are scrolling through looking at, a number of these tournaments that are playing pool matches, a lot of, there are going to be matches that mean less than others. So just to kind of be aware about that as well. There's been a couple of tournaments where, players have been guaranteed entry through to the playoff section, or, have been knocked out and have retired mid-match, or, withdrawn before the match even started. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on those ones if you are looking for little spots or places to kind of take advantage. But beyond that, it's just nice to see players getting back out there and doing what they've been doing their whole lives, basically.
So when are we going to have tennis back, Steve?
That is a fantastic question. When are we? Just because you obviously have more of an affiliation with the WTA, I thought we'd start with the proposed schedule. That the WTA, I think they put this out earlier today, didn't they? The provisional schedule.
Yeah, I think it was about 7 hours ago. If you want to check out their account on Twitter, you can see it.
Yeah, and I've just popped the tweet up there as well. So, thank you to the WTA for putting out a calendar that's that works well, and you can kind of see what's going on. I guess there's a lot of question marks over the last 12 hours or so about what's going to be happening. Obviously, there's some question marks around the US Open, as to if it falls under, I think, was it all other major events in New York through September are out of action. But the other thing that's come up, I think, is that we're not sure now whether China will be doing any international sporting events for the rest of the year. So when you take a look at that October, through to the end of November period of the calendar that the WTA has proposed, they're going to need to start thinking, I think, as to where to with that. Early thoughts, I guess, of of what you're seeing there, and what are your thoughts on, I guess, the play being proposed over a number of different countries and continents?
As you start to look at it, you can see a real rhythm. And honestly, the U.S. Open sticks out like a sore thumb. It seems almost like they'd rather it be some other time because, look at the schedule that you can see. They start in Europe. They'll be in Palermo, Prague, and Lexington for 2 weeks. I'm sorry, Lexington is actually in the United States, so that is a U.S. event. But they'll start in Palermo and Prague for 2 weeks. One event before they have the Western and Southern Open, which is what is that classified for the men? That's a Masters Thousands. For the women, it's a Premier 5 or something. Anyway, it's a little bit of a longer event. So they'll have that. Then they'll have the U.S. Open, hypothetically. And then it seems to be the rest of the season, they're doing a good job of kind of keeping everybody in at least the same continent. You have Madrid, then you have Rome, Strasbourg, Paris. I'm interested to see. I'm not totally up to date on how things are going in Italy. I know they were rough early on, but hopefully they've calmed down a little bit. I know they're playing soccer, so at the very least that's going well. So it seems to be they float back to Europe, and then like you said, from October on, the rest of the year that's all in Asia. You have Seoul, that's obviously Korea, not China, but then you have Beijing, which is in China, Wuhan, which is in China, Nanchang, Zhengzhou, Moscow's in Russia, Tokyo's in Japan. So those events are a little different, but I know that Tokyo specifically will probably be focused more on the Olympics next year, frankly. And I know that, again, they're being very hesitant. Then it's, again, back to China, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Guangzhou. So like you said, it's, fingers crossed, everybody. Let's hope that this works out and we get some answers to a lot of these questions. But it seems to be they've done a nice job of trying to keep everybody hopefully relatively the same. I frankly would like to see, so they took the Western and Southern Open in the United States and put them in New York. Now, there was a report today that the mayor of New York City said that there's not going to be any public events there until September. The U.S. Open starts August 31st. The Western and Southern is supposed to start August 21st. So I like the idea, frankly, of trying to put them together. Like, I wish that they could find a way to take maybe Madrid, Rome, Strasbourg, maybe try to put them in the same city, or maybe even put them in France, knowing that's where Roland Garros is going to be. So, I think I would have liked to see a little more structure that way. But, fingers crossed, this seems doable. What do you think?
It interests me how we've gone from nothing being able to be undertaken. So, let's think back to look at Indian Wells, for example. All the players arrived, everything was managed okay, and there was one positive case, I think, in the county, or was it the county next door to Indian Wells? And that was enough for them to pull the pin on the tournament and to suspend everything.
Right.
Now we're looking at sending players to different continents quite quickly. Ultimately, with that last period there in Asia, which that's a big money maker for the WTA in this instance. That for them to be able to hold those tournaments and take the the year-end championships, that's a lot of money that's on the table here for the WTA. And it's just, for me personally, I almost started thinking, and I put a poll up on Twitter last week, I think it was, around people's thoughts around, are we doing a disservice? Not we, because we're not involved, but is the tour doing a disservice by trying to get everything back in such a condensed calendar across so many different countries, when what we know about travel and 14-day quarantine and what's going to be required for self-isolation and in all these places in one way or another, be it the rules in those countries or the rules for those who have traveled from other countries that are worse off at the moment. It just seems like it's very, very scattered, and looking at all these tournaments, you think that basically everything that I've got listed up on that screen there, barring people being unable to travel, everything there is tailored to the top 100 effectively. So, you think back to what was going on at the start of this whole suspension of the tour, talking about a union and talking about getting everything together. now and trying to get set up relief funds for people ranked outside the top 100. I couldn't find an ITF schedule today, tweeted or anything to find out what players who can't make this level are actually going to be able to do in terms of earning money. It feels like we're bringing everything back at the top, and there's going to be a bigger disparity than we probably had before.
I was actually kind of on the other side of it. I think that because they're going to run out of players for a lot of these events, I think that you're going to start to see them open up. I think that if we do have a U.S. Open, it's only going to be players that have been in Canada or the United States. And what that's going to do, I think, is frankly open up more spots. And again, as you start to look at the schedule, know what the quarantine rules are. So Roland Garros starts September 27th. That'll finish, October 5th. I'm sorry, October 12th or so, October 10th, 11th. Beijing starts October 12th. Anyone that is at the French Open isn't going to have enough time to quarantine to make Beijing. And if you make the second week of Beijing, you're missing Beijing and probably Wuhan as well. So I think a lot of that stuff is going to create situations where they have these tournaments, frankly, with a lot of spots. So I wonder if this is actually an opportunity for some players that are closer to some of these locations to play. I do agree with your point. It's too scattered, and we're seeing some talk in the chat. Not too much optimism about there being tennis in China. Again, fingers crossed. We're trying to be optimistic here, but I do give them a little credit for trying to extend themselves. Trying to get all this stuff out and be ready for the best case scenario. But you're right. As you start to look at it, I think that either you're going to start to see some watered down fields, or they're going to have to start picking some of these events off kind of one by one, getting rid of the smaller ones so that those can be, travel quarantine weeks for some of these better players.
Yeah, and I guess that thinking through that as well of where these tournaments fall, and from what players have posted on social media before, it looks like acceptance and putting yourself on lists, tournament lists, has been quite difficult at times for players prior to all this. But if players are trying to set themselves up and quarantine, how many instances are we going to have of players late withdrawals due to quarantine and other players not being able to get there? There's just a lot of questions just beyond just kind of slapping the tour together and going, well, here's the tournaments. What are we going to do from here?
Right.
I've just popped up on here. So the ATP tour. So this one's a little bit older because they haven't updated it as recently as the WTA and even the challenger level. But
yeah, much more compact.
Yeah, it is. And I guess what we need to think about, and we'll discuss a little bit more with the look ahead to Grand Slams and I guess some of the odds that are out there. The interesting one here is that top 10 players, if they want to play in Austria on the 8th of September, they need to have participated. I think it was in at least turned up to the US Open in some capacity. I know that was kind of dubbed the Dominic Thiem rule at the time because Thiem was looking to play his home tournament instead of playing the Olympics. But again, you're looking at, if you want to be able to play any clay court tennis before Roland Garros, you need to not be participating in US Open.
And even frankly, to play Roland Garros, it's hard to be in the U.S. Open. If you are in the second week of the U.S. Open, you're making a lot of decisions around, am I really going for this, or am I going to try to pack up and get the next flight I can so I have just enough time to play the first round at Roland Garros. Again, another comment from our buddy WB there in the chat. He's right. I think players are going to have to build their schedule around where they are. Now, I do wonder. Again, there was the announcement from New York that there's not going to be any tennis there. I wonder if there is going to be a relocation. You mentioned Indian Wells, and that's kind of where the start of the problem was. But I always thought that was a better location, frankly, for stuff like this. I know that Indian Wells is, more isolated from a big city, which maybe makes supporting that many people, from a logistics standpoint, a little tougher. But I always thought, from a bubble perspective, that would probably be a lot safer. That's one of the other thoughts I have. I think that maybe they'll try to stick to the schedule, but I wonder if the locations of all the tournaments. Obviously, I think Roland Garros will be in Paris. I know that France is doing an okay job, and they'll probably be ready for that by the time we get to September. But I wonder if you see those U.S. events maybe move to another venue. Yeah,
definitely. And I guess something that, just as I've popped up the calendar, I think that Sven had put up on Twitter late last week around I guess what we're going to be seeing from a challenger perspective to kind of marry in with that ATP tour. And you made a good point before about players, I guess, if they're going to have to pick their spots as to where they're going to play and what countries they're going to be in. I guess a worry initially that hasn't been discussed a lot is, you look at, while those big tournaments are going on in, Washington, Cincinnati, well, it's at the US Open, but, in North America, how strong are the fields going to be in these clay court challenges that are going on at the same time?
This is going to be, this is I'm interested to see, and I haven't heard anything. I don't know. Again, you're a little more in touch with tennis media than I am in general, but have you seen anything from the ITF? I wonder if they've been quiet, because a lot of those guys know that they're going to be, hopefully filling up some of these events.
Well, that's the thing. It's, what are the draw cutoffs going to be for this? You look at the one in Prague, for example. Are we going to see, Dominic Thiem?
Yeah, 48. That's a big field.
You're looking at these
that's
draws,
interesting.
and
these some of the better players might jump into these events.
Well, this is, I guess, my concern. I guess thinking further down, below the top 100, that if you're
Right.
going to, you've made the decision that you're not going to travel for the US Open, what is stopping these players from just hoarding Prague to Ostrava, and then heading over to, heading to the other side of Europe, and players outside the top, 150 don't have a tournament that they can participate in, because you've got the likes of, for example, say Berrettini or someone, wanted to play challenges when they could be playing, the US Open elsewhere. Are we going to see players make desperation moves across continents to be able to play, bigger tournaments that aren't suited to them, because that's all they've got?
That's a great point. I hadn't considered that. You're right. I think some of the guys in Europe, as you start to line that schedule up, right, there'll be an event in Washington and Cincinnati and the U.S. Open. If you're not going to the U.S. Open, right, if you're Dominic Thiem, again, a name we've been hitting a lot, but, if you're him and you decide, I'm not going to the U.S. Open, I want to stay in Europe and play in Roland Garros, there's no reason you don't go to Prague at least one of those 2 weeks and check out what's going on. Maybe Ostrava, that second week, or Parma or whatever. But, you're right. Maybe they're pushing out some people, whose bread and butter, frankly, their opportunity to earn is these challenger events. Again, hopefully, I hope it's balanced out by the fact that some of these bigger events are going to need people. So hopefully there's a chance for some puts and takes there. But you're right. That's interesting.
It does. There's a lot of questions there, I think, is the thing, and they're questions that probably haven't been asked a lot. And whether some of those tournaments, perhaps, if you do have direct entry into high-level tournaments that week, that you're not eligible for those lower ones, where players who have been hanging out months to be able to try and earn some smaller money and ranking points, so they can get their opportunities as well. But again, it comes back to that whole, you set up a relief fund for players. You need to give players who haven't had the earning capacity or ability to kind of manage, as well as some other players, you need to give them opportunities to actually earn when the tour resumes. So it'd be interesting to see what they do in terms of cutoffs or the like. Now, we'll move on to Grand Slam early thoughts. What we thought we might do here is, I don't think, and having spoken about this a little bit with you, Noops, there's not a lot of markets around in terms of the US Open at the moment, because there are so many questions.
Yeah, I checked. I have just about every offshore anybody could have. I checked most, if not all of them, before we got on. I don't see U.S. Open's odds anywhere. I think, again, a lot of it's around news of, the mayor of New York saying there's not going to be any public events there until September, which obviously messes up the U.S. Open. Some of the players starting to be more open, honest around, maybe we'll just stay in Europe. Rafael Nadal has been very honest about not really being interested in the U.S. Open, frankly. He'd rather just go to the French Open. So, if Novak Djokovic decides to stay in Europe, Steve, what do you think? If we have a U.S. Open, from the men's side, we'll talk about the men here specifically for a second, and none of the big three are there. We already know Roger's out. Rafael Nadal is probably out. If Novak Djokovic doesn't play, does this U.S. Open count, or do we have to put like an asterisk next to it? Is it a half slam? Should we take the trophy and make it smaller?
Look, you can you can say it's not going to count, but 20, 30 years down the track, I don't think players are going to care that it's their name there and that they've won a Grand Slam. I think ultimately, he did make a good point, and it's worth kind of circling back to around. Outside of Serena Williams, I haven't seen that many players come out openly in support of playing the US Open. I feel like Andreescu may have potentially, but then if you think about, if the WTA have followed along, I think with the point system that the ATP is going to go with, they're probably the two that would benefit the least from the current setup, because they're going to keep their finalist and title winner points from last year. So I haven't seen as many people in support of the US Open as we've seen, those who are probably a little bit hesitant and looking to probably go through Europe.
Well, the WTA is a little more unique because a lot of the top talent is already in the United States, is already in Canada. As you start to look at some of those top rankings, yes, of course, there's a lot of Europeans, but at the same time, there's enough talent for the WTA side here already, I think, in North America to make that a more legitimate event. I think the men's side, again, it comes down to, the big three skipped, so it doesn't count, which I think is really stupid. I think that anyone that wins the U.S. Open, no matter who actually shows up, I mean, if you take that logic and carry it through, when the big three retire, nothing that ever happens in tennis ever again matters. Like, it's just asinine to me. So I do hope they have the U.S. Open. I think that'll be fun, and whoever wins absolutely deserves it.
Yeah. Question for the women's US Open then. So from my understanding, I think that the court surface has changed this year. Is that right? I think that they've put a new surface in at Flushing Meadows. How would you feel as a player knowing that Serena Williams was basically delivered a court with the same surface to her house?
So I guess my question is, and again, this is someone who's played tennis. I don't actually know if I've ever played a match of tennis scored. But anyway, so from that perspective, I guess my question would be is it a secret? Like, can no one else look up what the surface is and order it for themselves? It's Serena Williams, and she's a great player. And I of course, I roll my eyes. It shouldn't be one of those things where, the director of the U.S. Open's like, hey, here's the court surface. Or was she just the only player audacious enough to be like, hey, what are you putting down? All right, I'm going to take the money. And then, again, she has the money to put that down. Not every player does. But I guess my question to you is it a clandestine secret? I mean, or can we just go up on the internet and be like, oh, it's this?
I think that's the thing. I think, if you can afford to do it, then there's nothing stopping you from doing it. I would probably say, based on what we've seen, and we didn't talk about her in the winners and losers, but at the start in terms of this quarantine break. But I think Serena is probably one of the winners in terms of it's giving her a chance to reset that she probably hasn't had since she came back to the tour after.
Yeah, if you come right. You combine that break with the fact that, again, we might have a watered-down U.S. Open. This could be a good chance for her to grab another slam. So definitely a winner.
Yeah. And probably one to watch, I think, if those odds do come out in a number of places. I think I saw a week or two ago that she was 5-1.
I was lucky enough. I got some 5-1. I think even some 6-1 before they closed down. So hopefully those hold.
Yeah, and not everyone plays for records, but I think she's desperately looking for that next Grand Slam, and I don't think she'll care whether there's an asterisk or half the people don't turn up to Flushing Meadows. That she's going to be there and giving 100%. Now, what we do have, and obviously there's not a lot of odds out at the moment because we don't know what's going to happen, but there are some markets up, and we've just grabbed from Unibet for this example for the French Open. So I don't know if we can see that up on the screen there. Hopefully it's not too small for the people who are viewing this. This is, I mean, any name that I haven't put on there is effectively $700 or worse. Anything standing out to you there?
So look, and I actually put a couple of these in, and there were some bigger ones. Let me see if they made your cutoff. Sorry, I'm leaning forward, folks. You're looking at my shoulder right now. Let me see. I don't. There we go. Jill Teichman. Oh, so she's all right now. I see her at 301 or 300 to 1. I actually bet her earlier in the week at 500 to 1. I still like her at 300. Again, she's not somebody I think of as someone who's going to win the French Open, but I think with the right draw, you're looking at an opportunity to have a huge outright price that can easily make it to a quarterfinal, if not through a quarterfinal. And then the other number I had was, there we go, right above her, Kaha Hooven. She was actually 800 to 1 at the beginning of the week, and she's down to 300. I like both of them from a big odds perspective. Now, when I start to look at some of maybe the more realistic options, again, trying to think about who's going to be where, we already know that Simona Halep has said she's not going to play the U.S. Open. So I think that her price, again, it's tough to bet a short favor in the WTA, but I wonder if that price is going to get even shorter as you start to see some of these names drop out. Like you've got Andreescu there at 11 or 10 to 1. She's probably not going to show up to Roland Garros and play there. I mean, what happens to the odds when she pulls out? Again, so I like that Simona Halep number. I don't know if I'm ready to bet it. That might be one of those fun things, if you've got some UFC this weekend. According to my smart UFC friends, actually Mason, if he's still watching, follow at Mason_Crowley. If that doesn't work, find me in DMs. I'll give you his stuff. He has great UFC picks, but there's a guy, Usman, who's playing USMAN. Maybe it's Usman. Maybe it's Usman. Maybe I'll take him and parlay him with like Halep or something goofy like that. So that's something I'm going to think about. But as you start to look at some of the other ones, Muguruza was playing really great tennis earlier in the year. I don't know that if she can find her form on clay. The Coco Gauff price, that's just stupid. I don't know why that she is the odds that she does. Looking down the list, it's tough because I guess Kiki Burton's maybe, but I don't bet on her or against her because I'm always wrong about that. Serena Williams, I don't actually know if Serena's going to show up.
And I guess that's the thing there, that you look at a number of players in that first kind of 20 or so that are North American. You think about kind of the preparation they're going to have compared to some of the others. I gravitate to even Elena Rybakina.
That's interesting.
Down there at $31. There's a couple there that you start to think, and I don't know if Spread's watching this, but you've got Ostapenko there at $91.
I said that to him the other day. He was not terribly confident. No. It's funny, like you said, that top section has a lot of Americans, but also not a lot of clay players. So if you're looking at the list, like Serena all the way through up through Sabalenka, up to just before Svitolina. I mean, those are names you're just never going to bet to win, Roland Garros. You get to Svitolina, maybe this is another great year for her. Again, with kind of a watered-down field, I wonder if she has a chance. Sophia Kenin would be great to bet at these odds, but I don't know if she is going to, again, leave the U.S., skip the U.S. Open, and really commit to doing this. I guess Swiatek is really interesting. That is a lot of respect for her at that number. I like her a lot, and I would have wanted a better price there. Kerber, that's an interesting name. So I'm looking. So she's the same price as Rybakina. Which do you think is a better value there?
I think for the clay, I'd probably go Rybakina. I think Kerber needs a lot more to go right for her to perform on clay and to be successful. Whereas Elena's able to hit through the ball and actually hit opponents off the court. Looking through,
I'm sorry, we got two other players there actually at the same odds. That's interesting. So 4 players at the same odds: Kerber, Rybakina, Stevens, and Vondrousova. And this is actually one of my favorite exercises. I like looking when they kind of group people together. It seems like a really interesting group. I'm surprised Stevens is that low. I'm actually surprised Rybakina is that low. And that seems like, again, in comparison, Vondrousova to me is, I don't necessarily know if I'd like her at 30 to 1. But I think she's the best of that group. What do you think of that little pod?
Yeah, I think so as well. And even then, you start to work down, and I think this is the keeping an eye on these markets and watching for players to commit to particular tournaments is going to be important. You can scroll down and whilst her form hasn't been great, Kiki Mladenovic is at 250 to 1. She is French. There is meant to be a reported crowd, albeit a reduced capacity crowd. There, you would assume that she would be playing the French Open, all things considered. It's just worth keeping an eye on some of those European players who are at bigger odds. And even if you can find a market somewhere that's friendly, that you can get an each way selection on, and try and get someone to squeeze their way through to a final. There's some names out there that could make a run. I mean, Kai Kanepi's made runs before, I think, at Roland Garros. That there's a few there that are capable of taking out some big names, or they might not even need to take out big names. Depends on who turns up.
Yeah, I liked what you were talking about in terms of, for people that are listening, as you pick up information, as you hear about players making decisions and not making decisions, these markets are stale. They frankly, from my perspective, lag behind from an information perspective. A lot of times you hear about people pulling out or doing certain things. Even as you started to hear stuff about the U.S. Open, they left those outrights up for a long time. Serena Williams, or even the U.S. Open outrights at all, shouldn't have been up a couple of weeks ago. So as you see stuff come up, and you're starting to look for opportunities, and you see players you like, don't be afraid to go in and sprinkle some of those bigger numbers. Again, like I said, I hit Teichmann 500 to 1, Huvon, or Juvon, or Uvon, whatever it is, 500 to 1. Small dollars, obviously, but just good opportunities to scope some of that. I think, again, like I said, I'm going to think about this a little bit more, and maybe you can talk me out of it, but I think I'm going to try to find something to parlay with Halep to see if I can get her, close to like 10 to 1 or something like that. But it really seems like a year where her, and then again, as I start to look down, Svitolina, that looks like an interesting price, but the women will be really interesting. Now, I see you've got the Met up here. I think, again, based on what we talked about for the U.S. Open, it seems like everybody's showing up here to play. So you see the big three. You've got Nadal. There he is, as usual, minus 110 for American odds. I think, let me just get 1.9. So that's minus 10, or, a little less than 1 to 1. You've got Novak 2.5 to 1, Team 3 to 1. Maybe my question for you is, can you make any case to pick anybody but those three men?
Look, it's difficult. Nadal's come in, and Nadal is the price he is because he's confirmed to play Madrid, and everyone's reading between the lines that he's not going to travel to the US. Novak hasn't seemed to have made up his mind yet, and part of me thinks that no Federer, no Nadal in the US. Novak might try and sneak another slam closer to those two on something that in albeit a weakened field. Look, as you scroll down there, we hit the triple figures very, very quickly, don't we? You could maybe
where's Gale? I don't see Gale.
50 to 1.
Ooh, that's a fun one. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, you start to look at it, I think it's a big three. As you start to look at some more interesting choices, do you think, God, I was hoping the odds on Casper Ruud would be a little bit better. What is that? Looks like he's 76 or 75 to 1.
Yeah.
What do you think about him? I mean, do you think he can do it in 5 sets?
I'd like to see a little bit more from. I mean, he was in great form through that South American swing just before the tour was postponed.
Rublev 100 to 1.
It's tricky with those players. I mean, you look at Fognini's 150 to 1, but he's had double ankle surgery.
What about Schwartzman? Could Schwartzman just be in shape everybody? Like, he's 150 to 1. Is there any reason to think when this comes back that he just isn't in better shape than everybody and just like walks through his quarter because he's ready and no one else is?
Yeah, he could. I mean, you can scroll down a little bit further. I mean, Richard Gasquet's, played some relatively decent tennis now that he looks fit. I guess, whilst worth mentioning, I'll just put our friend up here. Nice to see that someone's followed along our advice here and been able to get an 18-cent each way bet on the French Open. So that's nice little advertisement there.
Yeah, I know we're using Unibet, and we're not using Unibet because we want to. If you look at my timeline, there's a lot of complaints I have about Unibet. Our buddy WB, thanks for pulling that up, Steve, was talking about it. It's tough. I mean, you go in there, they don't want you to bet these things at all. So, I mean, he's being limited to 18 cents each way. I know there was one account they actually just kept, they didn't say I couldn't bet it, but they kept telling me I was betting too much or too little even when I was trying to bet the minimum. It was very odd. So using Unibet because they have odds to talk about, not necessarily because it's easy to bet there.
Correct. Now, nothing would be more 2020 than if you just cast your eye to that third column, fourth name down.
Sorry,
500.
hold on, Steve. We need to stop for a second. Did you see that Bandy Wales is back?
I think. Oh, I'll just pop the comment up on.
Now, I know I mentioned we were rusty earlier on, and we had one mistake. I think our second mistake is right now. How did we not have a Bandy update for the people?
That's true. I just don't think there's been. I haven't had any Bandy information come across my desk. I've kept a close eye on all the NASA news because I know we talked about that during the break as to how we could best make a little bit of money during that quarantine period. When I last check, I don't think anyone's on Mars yet, so that one's still alive at
darn it,
$1.50.
Wait, did we say no or yes? I can't remember.
I can't even remember.
I think we said no.
Let's not go back there. Let's push forward.
It feels like we're pessimistic. Anyway, sorry. We'll try to wrap up the men here a little bit, unless you had some real Bandy thoughts. I just wanted to give a shout out to our undefeated Bandy career and make sure that we put a pin in that for the next time.
That we will. Nothing would be more 2020 than Benoit Paire winning the French Open.
That's interesting. I wonder, because I know that the French specifically have an attitude and a reputation, at least from my perspective, of not being entirely supportive of a lot of their players. When we talked about the women, we skipped over Caroline Garcia, and for me, that was simply because I actually don't think the crowd is going to cheer for her. From the men's side, does Paire have a good supportive crowd? Does somebody like Luca Pouille have a good supportive crowd? This is an awful surface for Tsonga, but maybe you can just mash people for enough rounds to make it interesting. I feel like I'm missing one other big French name. We mentioned Monfils.
Yeah.
Right. That's probably the reason I like him too, because honestly, from a stupid bettor's perspective, there is nothing more fun than betting on Gael Monfils. You're just going to watch these matches and see stuff that you've never seen tennis players do. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be happy. You're going to be excited. You're going to be sad. And at 50-1, that's kind of a fun lottery ticket to have. So you mentioned Paire. Any other Frenchman you might consider?
I don't think we've seen enough from Luca Pouille. They're the kind of players that I'd be keeping an eye on, and players that are live either in France or close to France, that that you're going to get them to participate in the tournament, or that they're more likely to participate. And that was part of the appeal. I think there's some Australian Open markets out there at the moment, and I put a tweet up a couple of weeks ago around taking Alex de Minaur at 125-1, just because he's probably going to participate at the Australian Open regardless of how it looks. Apart from that, there's not a lot else you can really confidently attack here until you start to see it, and perhaps join the dots that get onto Feliciano Lopez's Twitter account, and he's the tournament director of Madrid, and when Nadal did say that he was hoping to participate in Madrid, that I think those odds did come in a little bit for him for the French Open, because he's going to have 2 lead-up tournaments, and he's going to be in the area to be able to participate. I think something that's worth keeping an eye on is having the calendars handy and starting to look and go, right, so if they've accepted for this tournament, this means that and try and join the dots, and you might not always be right, but particularly like we saw with one of our followers up there, it's only 18 cents each way that you can get on in a lot of these markets, so you're not breaking the bank.
Yeah, the only other thought that I had here was, have you heard any good information about some of the South American players? I was just flipping through. I looked at Guido Pea's name, and I wonder if we know kind of what it looks like down there. Have you heard anything about South America?
I haven't heard a lot. I guess the other one is Christian Yolien at 50-1. Him and Ruud, I think, were kind of yo-yoing those South American tournaments at the start of the year in February. He's probably shown a little bit more against some of those top players. Again, not South American, but Stan Wawrinka. He always kind of sits there at that price that, we saw him beat Medvedev at the Australian Open, and, he can take scalps, but is he just a bit, are we going to see 7 quality performances from him to win a slam? Scrolling further down there's not a lot of...
So hold on 1 second. The third rusty moment. We probably should have started with this. I actually just real quick did the math. What do you think the implied probability of just Nadal, Djokovic, and team is? Try to do it in your head real quick. See if you can give me a guess.
Oh, any of those three win?
No, all three. Yeah, all three. Yeah, right. Exactly. I did the probability for all three. So like Nadal at 1.9 is 52.6%, and they did the other two. What do you think the three combined are?
Oh, look, currently it'd be, personally, I'd say 85-ish.
106%. So there is no way. If you sat down and did all the math and tried to figure it out, you could not bet all three of them and make money. It would be impossible. So think about that as you're starting to look at some of these outrights. Again, we talk about that, and maybe to take a big step back from a betting perspective, when you think about the implied probability of something, it is the percent times it needs to win, or the percentage that it needs to win at long term to break even. So again, looking at Nadal, it's 1.9. If he would, essentially that says to break even, he has to win the tournament 52.6% of the time. You look at Novak Djokovic, his price at 3.5 there, or 2.5 to 1 is 28.6, and then team is pretty easy there at 3 to 1. His implied probability is 25. So you add all them up, and it's actually greater than 100%. So as you start to look at everybody else, essentially what that tells me is the market doesn't actually give anybody but these three guys a chance. So as you start to look at some of these other ones, I think, again, you want to stick to maybe some bigger numbers, knowing you're going to have to hedge down the road. And even then it's going to be tough because they're going to run into some of these guys and they'll be big favorites. So maybe be more recreational in betting anyone but those three.
Yeah, and I think, picking outrights is difficult at the best of times before you add in all the complications that are going to come for the rest of this year. So, and as always, if you are gambling, please do so responsibly. What we might do just to finish off, we're creeping up towards the hour, which I think we've done well to get through an hour. Now, this doesn't have to necessarily be tennis, but, what are your plans, I guess, for the rest of 2020?
As I start to think about it, there's sports. I'm sorry?
I'm going to guess there's going to be a bit of NBA involved soon.
There is. Things are starting to heat back up a little bit. We had some news today. James Harden and Russell Westbrook, it seems, have coronavirus. The NBA is supposed to start up here at the end of July, so we've got 3 weeks until that, which means if they tested negative today, they'd still have to wait 14 days and only have a week to get ready for the regular season. So jumping into some of that NBA stuff, Spread Astaire and I did a podcast. It's a pretty solid 90 minutes breaking down what's going to happen in terms of the NBA season, how it's going to work. We went through each team, broke down their schedule. There's a lot of fun markets out there. There's over-unders for the 8 games from our friends at Bet Online. Some really fun stuff there, and definitely some value in those numbers for sure. And then we actually had a chance to break down the first couple games. So I am back kind of, deep into the NBA. Tennis, I think, again, is going to start to slowly come back. I'm starting to do a little bit more work there. And just trying to get my arms around what all this is going to look like when it comes back. How about you?
Yeah, look, I think much of the same. Obviously, as someone who, runs a business that is reliant on tennis being played, I would like to see it back, but, we need to make sure that when it comes back, it's going to be done or undertaken in the right fashion. So obviously, I was very lucky at the start of this year that I didn't make the decision to flip completely to covering tennis full time, because otherwise I would be in a really terrible situation at the moment, and would probably sound a little bit more desperate in terms of wanting to tour back. So I'm just going to continue with my other study and other work that I've got lined up in the interim. Looking to do a little bit of back testing for some fantasy tennis work.
Yeah, you're getting to fantasy. So tell us a little bit about that, because I know you want to expand kind of in general what it means to be, Steve and Ace Tennis Previews, but give us your little elevator pitch. What are you doing? What are you up to?
I guess from before the quarantine period, obviously I was doing a subscription service and kind of running through that and having previews sent out, if not every day, close to every day. At least for the rest of 2020, that's not going to be happening. So I just want to have a little bit more flexibility personally with what I can do. So that will involve a combination of obviously, being able to sit down and do videos and chats like this, regularly and not feel like I need to be kind of writing up previews and plays every other day. Fantasy tennis is obviously something that I've kind of dabbled with over the last couple of years, particularly through Grand Slams. I will put a call out to anyone, if there is anyone who has any historical data for any fantasy tennis results that have, that you've been able to grab in the last little while. I was hoping to do some back testing with some DraftKings data. Sent them off an email just asking, was it possible? And they got back to me and said that they're able to send me through information or data for any tennis contests that have been undertaken in the last 30 days.
Yeah, that's
so that's where that began and ended. So yeah, I'm just going to be doing a little bit of work with that in the background.
I'm sure you'll get some help on that. I actually, when we get offline here, I'll give you a couple people, but I think you'll do okay figuring that out.
Yeah, and I guess, as you probably saw through the last couple of months, just being able to write a couple of different pieces just on tennis. I mean, I know that I've kind of come to where I am at the moment because I've been able to provide previews and talk about tennis from an odd standpoint. But the reason that I follow tennis so closely is because I'm genuinely interested in how it's run, and it's something that obviously takes up a lot of time and energy and effort, and I'm hoping to I put posts up, and as I said before at the start, it's quite therapeutic writing some of these things. I don't care if one person reads it, I don't care if no people read it, I don't care if thousands of people read it. I'm just happy to use kind of, I've got a website there, and it's about tennis and covering tennis, and I figure a mixture of previews, opinion, and fantasy is probably the way forward. I want to try and figure out ways to get as many eyes on tennis as possible. You look at what's going on at the moment, there's just not a lot of coverage of a lot of areas, that are particularly mainstream tennis. So look, if I can do anything to help that in any way, shape or form, then I will. But if not, then so be it. We'll continue to try and find different ways.
It'll be fun to get back to writing a little bit. I can't wait to do my first outright preview. Again, I mentioned the Net Worth podcast that I did with Spread. We're starting to get back to some of those. I'm sure we'll get Jorge and Spread back together for a tennis podcast real soon. It'll be nice to get all that stuff back and get into that. So, fingers crossed this all works itself out. But the rest of 2020 is focused on trying to be optimistic and enjoying sports as they slowly come back.
Slowly. We will get there, though. Fingers crossed. Hopefully sooner rather than later, and hopefully when everything comes back, it will be here to stay. I also just want to say a quick thank you to, obviously there's been a lot of people who have sent kind of messages, and obviously it's a tricky time at the moment for a lot of people in a lot of different areas. I just wanted to quickly mention obviously I've kind of posted, particularly across this year, a lot of different comments and tweets around kind of mental health and people looking out for each other. We're able to raise over $1,000, I think, for Beyond Blue at the start of the year and with the Australian Open. That I think it's very easy to look at social media and look at a lot of different people who, I guess, post that kind of top 10% of your life, the kind of positive things, and then you look out there and you can kind of get a little bit of a warped sense of, I guess, what reality can look like for a lot of people. And sometimes if you are a little bit quieter, or I guess on the more introverted side, that it can be difficult to kind of express how you're feeling with a lot of things going on in the world. And particularly at the moment, for example, I'm in Melbourne, we're on day 2 of a 42-day lockdown, which isn't going to be easy for a lot of people. But if anyone does, I think Twitter gets a bad rap, in particular on a lot of occasions, for a lot of behaviour. But I think it also does a really good job that if people do reach out and feel like they do need assistance, that the community can kind of come together as well. doesn't have to be, you know, a post out on Twitter to the public, but, you know, even if you just want to send a message, a direct message or something, if anyone wants to get in touch, or, you know, obviously that, you know, to have a look at those numbers or website links that you can keep an eye on in your local areas. But I guess, you know, particularly with and to the wider kind of tennis group at the moment, just be nice to each other. I think, you know, and you know, it's easy to be critical at times, and, you know, some people do some silly things, and we've seen that in the last 24 hours even. I don't think we're going to get into a position to be able to, you know, I think in our format and how it's set up, it can be easy to kind of say things that you wouldn't say directly to someone's face, or even still, you know, some of the messages that, you know, not only like the average day person will receive, but, you know, a lot of players receive, or just seeing some of the messages that are sent to players playing exhibitions that you know, haven't played tennis for a bit because people have lost money, or, you know, aren't in a good space. Just take a breath, take a couple of, you know, even take a minute or two and walk around your house for a bit, and then decide whether you want to hit tweet or you want to hit send on something to someone else. I know I've sent a couple of things to you, Noobs, that I've probably been a bit mean, but I know you can handle it.
No, Steve, you've never said anything mean to anyone, as far as I understand. But I'm generally a meaner person than you, so maybe I'm a lot meaner than I think, and you're not as mean. But you're right. What you said, you know, especially the part about mental health and everything, just in general, you know, if you're ever feeling down and you're questioning yourself, just reach out. There's a lot of people out there, and as scary and mean and nasty and Twitters can be sometimes, it is actually kind of a big, beautiful community. It's helped you and I connect. It's helped a bunch of people connect. A lot of the people that are in this Periscope right now, and a lot of our friends, that's how we connect. So, you know, reach out. More people than you understand are willing to help you. So, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out.
And I guess moving forward for the rest of this year, there will be a lot of different video content that we're looking to do, particularly more so once, you know, tennis does resume at a tour level. So keep an eye on Periscope through Twitter. So if you have those notifications on for when we go live, you'll get those. Subscribe to YouTube, to search for Ace Previews, and you'll see a list of all these live broadcasts that we popped onto YouTube, and try and get some other video pieces that are not done live, that are, I guess, a little bit more analysis once the tour resumes. And keep an eye out for, you know, if we do look out to expand and do some more live streams on some other areas. I think Noops might be a little bit old for Twitch, but we might move down that kind of path at some point.
Hey, as long as I don't have to do it, as long as you're just like tagging me in for stuff, I'm good. As long as that's a nice part. In case you guys wonder, this is all on Steve. He sends me a link, I click on it, I put some headphones in, and that's about as far as my technical expertise goes. So as long as you can continue to create that situation for me, I'll be there.
Will do. As always, anyone, if you have any questions, feedback, comments, send it through to us, and we can, you know, we want to try and make these as smooth and as enjoyable to watch as possible. Noops, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Reach out. Let us know what you want to hear about. You know, again, follow us on all other stuff. Like Steve, you mentioned the YouTube channel. Again, we'll be doing some net worth podcasts, especially for the NBA as that comes back. And I'm sure Steve will tag you in for some sort of tennis, something or other. Maybe a net worth live. We'll be flopping back and forth. But hopefully, folks, sports are back.
And as sports come back, we'll try and get more people on here, because, you know, we've got the ability to get a number of people on, as we saw during the Australian Open. So once things have started to come back, we'll start to get more people on and try and bring you some valuable content. So we'll see you soon.